Babbity Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump by J.K. Rowling. Number The Cackling Stump. A long time ago, in a kingdom where magic was forbidden and fear walked hand in hand with power, there lived a foolish king. He was not evil in the way of tyrants who delight in cruelty, but he possessed something perhaps more dangerous: vanity wrapped in insecurity, ambition tethered to incompetence. This king had recently issued a decree that all witches and wizards must be driven from the land, their wands broken, their enchantments silenced. Magic, he proclaimed, was the province of darkness and deception. Yet in the privacy of his gilded chambers, this same king nursed a secret hunger. He wanted magic for himself. It is a curious thing how those who condemn a power most loudly often crave it most desperately. The king's desire was not born of wisdom or wonder, but of spectacle. He imagined himself before his court, conjuring fountains of wine and flocks of golden birds, receiving gasps of amazement, basking in applause. He saw magic as a crown more brilliant than the one upon his head, a final proof of his supremacy. But the king possessed no magical blood, no innate gift, no patience for true study. What he needed was a shortcut. What he needed was a charlatan. Into his court came a man who smelled opportunity the way wolves smell wounded prey. This man was not a wizard. He had never cast a spell, never felt the hum of genuine magic in his bones. But he had watched wizards from the shadows, had stolen their gestures and memorized their words, and possessed the one talent that sometimes substitutes for all others: audacity. He bowed low before the king and announced that he was the greatest magical instructor in all the land, capable of teaching even the magically bereft to perform wonders. The king, whose judgment was clouded by desire, saw only what he wished to see. Gold changed hands. The lessons began. Every morning in a locked chamber, the charlatan would wave a twig he claimed was a wand and speak nonsense he insisted were incantations. The king, sweating beneath his ermine robes, would repeat the gestures and the gibberish, waiting for magic to bloom. Nothing happened. The charlatan would shake his head sorrowfully and explain that magic required patience, that the king was progressing remarkably, but not quite ready. Another week perhaps, another purse of gold. The king, having announced to his court that he was learning sorcery, could not now admit he had been deceived. Pride, once declared, becomes a prison. But not all eyes in the palace were blind. There was a woman who tended the gardens and the stables, who swept the floors and asked for little. Her name was Babbity, and she was small and plain, with age-weathered hands and a face that invited no second glances. The courtiers passed her as they would pass a chair or a stone. This was her great protection, for Babbity was a witch, a true one, who had lived in the kingdom long before the ban, and she survived now by being invisible. She knew what the charlatan was the moment she saw him. She recognized the absence of power, the hollow performance, and she knew, with the cold certainty that comes from long life and hard lessons, that this deception would end in blood. Charlatans always need scapegoats when their tricks unravel. The day came when the king could wait no longer. He announced a grand demonstration of his magical prowess. The entire court would gather. Nobles would witness. Historians would record. The king would perform spells, and his legend would be secured. The charlatan, trapped now in his own web, became desperate. He needed real magic, just once, just enough to satisfy the king and secure his escape. He discovered Babbity's secret, as such secrets are always discovered, through carelessness born of urgency. He found her one evening behind the stables, healing a wounded hound with a whispered charm, her true wand hidden in her apron. His eyes gleamed. He made her an offer dressed as a threat. Stand hidden during the performance, cast the spells while the king performed the gestures, and share the gold. Refuse, and he would denounce her as a witch to the king's guards. Babbity looked at this sweating, desperate fool and made a calculation. She agreed. The day of the performance arrived bright and cold, the courtyard filled with nobles in furs and velvets, their faces alight with curiosity and skepticism. The king emerged in ceremonial robes, his face flushed with nervousness and wine. The charlatan stood beside him, eyes scanning the shadows where Babbity waited, invisible as dust. The performance began. The king waved his false wand and shouted his nonsense words. From her hiding place, Babbity whispered true incantations. A fountain erupted, sparkling. Flowers bloomed from cobblestones. The crowd gasped and applauded. The king's chest swelled. He grew bolder, more theatrical. He pointed at a lady's hat and commanded it to sing. Babbity made it warble an aria. The applause grew thunderous. The king was drunk on it now, on the sound of his own magnificence made manifest. Then, as these things always do, the performance turned toward cruelty, disguised as entertainment. An old hound limped across the courtyard. The king, feeling invincible, announced he would demonstrate the greatest magic of all. He would raise the dead. He pointed his false wand at the ancient dog and commanded it to die, then to live again. Silence fell. The charlatan's face went white. He looked desperately toward Babbity's hiding place. Some magics are forbidden not because they are impossible, but because they are obscene. There are boundaries even power must respect. Babbity, who had healed that very hound days before, who knew its name and its gentle nature, made a different choice. She remained silent. She cast nothing. The old dog stood there, breathing, living, unchanged. The king shouted his command again. Nothing! Again! Nothing! The crowd's mood shifted like a turning tide. Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs became mockery. The king's face transformed from confusion to rage. He had been made a fool before his entire court. Someone would pay. The charlatan, with the survival instinct of a rat, spoke quickly. He announced that there was sabotage, that a wicked witch was present, concealed, deliberately undermining the king's magic. He pointed toward the stables, toward Babbity's hiding place. The crowd roared. The king, desperate to redirect humiliation into righteous anger, called for his guards. The hunt began. They found her quickly. She did not run, though she could have. Perhaps she was tired of running. Perhaps she knew that some stories must be played to their end. They seized her and discovered her wand tucked in her sleeve. The evidence was absolute. The king, still shaking with wounded pride, pronounced sentence. Babbity the witch would be burned at the stake at dawn. The crowd, grateful for a villain to explain their confusion, approved. But Babbity, standing small and calm between armed guards, made a request. One final request, as was traditional. She asked to be bound to a tree stump in the square rather than a stake. It was a strange request, but what did it matter? Wood was wood. The king agreed with a dismissive wave. Babbity was led away to the dungeons to await the morning fire. Dawn came gray and merciless. The crowd gathered again, though the mood was different now, darker, hungrier. Babbity was brought forth and tied to a great stump in the center of the square. The charlatan stood beside the king, relieved and already planning his departure from the kingdom. The executioner approached with his torch. The kindling was lit. Flames began to curl upward, and the crowd held its breath. Then Babity vanished. One moment she was there, bound and silent. The next, she was gone, leaving only empty ropes. The crowd gasped. The king stumbled backward. The charlatan's mouth fell open. And then, from the stump itself, came laughter. It was not pleasant laughter, not the sound of joy or mirth. It was cackling, harsh and mocking, echoing across the courtyard like the judgment of every lie ever told. The stump itself was laughing, the wood alive with Babity's voice. And in that laughter was everything. Every indignity she had endured, every truth that had been denied, every consequence these fools had refused to imagine. The king shouted for silence, but the laughter continued. He ordered his men to dig up the stump, to destroy it, to make the mockery stop. They dug, they hacked with axes, they tore at the roots. And the charlatan, desperate to prove his usefulness, grabbed an axe and struck at the stump with particular violence. The blade bit deep into the wood, and from within the stump came a different sound, a scream. The cackling stopped. Blood, red and real, seeped from the wound in the wood. The crowd drew back in horror. The king, his face ashen, suddenly understood what he had done, what they had all done. A witch was one thing, murder was another. And murdering a tree that bled was something else entirely, a curse perhaps, or a witness that could not be silenced. The king, thinking quickly in the way that power always thinks when faced with consequences, made a new decree. No witch would ever be harmed in his kingdom again. Magic would be tolerated, even honored. The law was changed immediately, announced with trumpets, carved in stone. Anything to stop the bleeding stump from testifying against him. But the stump never stopped cackling entirely. On certain nights, when the wind turned cold and the moon was dark, people passing through that square would hear it. Soft, knowing laughter bubbling up from the earth, a sound that made them walk faster, that made them remember that some deceits carry prices that compound across years. The charlatan, of course, fled the kingdom that very night. He was never seen again, though some say he died badly in another land, screaming about voices in wood. The king lived many more years, but never spoke of magic again, and his sleep was troubled by dreams of burning and laughter. As for Babity, she was never found. Some say she had transformed into a rabbit at the final moment, escaping through tunnels beneath the stump. Some say she lived for many years in a distant forest, healing creatures and teaching young witches to hide their gifts well. Some say the stump itself became her monument and her revenge, a permanent reminder that power built on lies devours itself eventually. The truth, perhaps, is simpler and stranger. Babity understood what the king and the charlatan never could, that magic is not spectacle or legitimacy or power over others. It is transformation, survival, the ability to become what the moment requires. She had been invisible her whole life, overlooked and dismissed. In the end, she became more than invisible. She became unforgettable, a voice that would not be silenced, a wound that would not heal, a lesson carved in wood and blood. The stump stands there still, they say, and on quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear it cackling at the folly of kings who burn what they do not understand, at charlatans who mistake performance for substance, at all those who believe that power and magic are the same thing. They are not. Magic is older and stranger and more patient than power. Magic remembers, magic waits, and magic, when sufficiently provoked, laughs last and longest from a place where flames cannot reach and axes cannot silence. That laughter is the moral. Listen to it carefully. You may need it someday.